how do I connect with you as a full person without having to risk pain?
Yeah.
It's like, let me just bowl you over and have the connection be so big in this area that I don't have to risk opening this other side of myself and still experience fullness, still experience a feeling of complete connection without having to go to the spot
where I could be hurt.
Yes. And so I'm trying to get it without the risk.
Yeah.
The big hormone enneagram.
Let me lay it on the line. I got a little freakiness inside. Let you know that the man has got to deal with it.
Hi, I'm John Lukovich, sexual self-pres 4-5 link, 4-5-8 trifix.
Hi, I'm David Gray, self-pres sexual 9-1, 9-7-4 trifix.
What up, it's Emeka. I'm an 8-7, sexual self-pres with 8-5-4 fixes.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I am a self-pres social 3, wing 4, with a 3-6-9 trifix. If you like our podcast, guys, make sure you go like and subscribe on the Apple Podcast app. And if you really like us, you should definitely leave us a review.
I had this feeling, this idea of the idea of separateness. And I do think it's interesting. It's like the language around the rejection types, I can feel it in myself too. So it's like everything I say about rejection types is true. It just like feels more true for rejection types.
Yeah.
Like, so it's the idea of that the type arising to protect vulnerability is true for all of us. The type structure and the relational dynamic. But it feels more true for the rejection types, the elimination of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And this idea of transactional nature of relationships is true for all of us. Yet somehow it feels more true, more obvious. And I think all of us feel separate. Like that's sort of we all walk around feeling that way. Yet it feels more vivid and visceral for the rejection types. And I had this thought of the separate, like, it's almost like the separateness of the 8. It's like all these little molecules, like down on Earth, like in the body zone, like all transacting dog eat dog, like every man for himself kind of feeling of separateness. And then for the 2, it's like all these human molecules down on Earth, and then they're like in the heart space, or they think they're in the upper heart space, kind of coming down to transact in a different way, like to bring something to all these human beings that are down on this earthly plane. And the 5 being in thinking they're in the higher mind space and doing the same sort of. So I guess I was wondering if there's a different kind of separateness quality to the 8, because at least it's all like we're all separate in the same way. Versus the 2 and the 5.
Well, one thing is, mentioned it before, and it's obvious in the symbol, is just that 8 has the lines to 2 and 5. And 5 and 2 don't have that similar thing. In other words, 8's right in the center of rejection. So that's interesting as maybe as the purest rejection type in a certain way.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's got the lines to 2 and 5, and 5 and 2. They each only have one line to a rejection type. But the separateness feels very different. Even just like watching Josh's interviews with Jesse and Niklas, Jesse's interview felt like I was just pushed into a corner in my mind. Like there was just an intensity in the mind. Like you had to take a break because it's like someone's drilling into your brain. And Niklas it had a very different feel. I was, maybe it affected me more because it was in the heart space and I was really getting the sort of negotiation in the heart, which is an area that, I don't feels very foreign to me, but maybe that's why it impacted me more, but because I was getting a really, really strong rejection hit, but from the heart center. And maybe it just feels more risky, feels more at stake there because of that. But yeah, they just feel very different, but each intent in their own ways.
Another thought that I had is, because I was thinking about the intensity, the flavor of intensity of all three and how it is there. And then I was sort of thinking about if you're in relationship with what you think are human beings that have different sides and parts to them in the way that I don't as a rejection type. And I was thinking about the possession and that sort of quality we're talking about. And I do think, again, this is something we all do, but it just feels more true with the rejection types, the boundary transgression that happens with each of them.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it's really hard to talk about it without using sexual language, but it has this feeling of like, I don't know, I was making up the story that the rejection types are like, I know that I'm not offering you the full thing, but if I like bowl you over with like how good this is, like if I just sweep you away and I like pour like the power of love or the drilling of the mind or the intensity of being like an animal, and all, like, you'll forget that these other parts like are part of what makes like a full human being and part of what makes a full relationship.
Yeah.
And so it's like I'm on this mission to kind of make it so, like you just can't help yourself but surrender to the terms on which I want to set this.
Yeah.
It's kind of like being a half person, and you crank up that half to make a whole.
Yeah.
Something.
To make up for it. Like,
yeah.
It's like the 8's gonna just turn up the volume on their personality. Like, I'm just gonna enliven your experience so much that you forget that I don't have any heart in play here. Yeah. And so it's just, I'm just jazzed by this, super activating force. And then 5 is just like, if you're like watching Jesse's interview, it's like, it's incredible just how many like, there's so many like specific insights that could lead to something else that are coming that you can't possibly digest them all. So it's inevitable that you're going to be blown away, right? And even I felt that with even Niklas's interview is like, man, there's just so many heart daggers, that are here that you couldn't possibly be able to process all this. So you're going to be in a state of being overwhelmed. And even like, my video sometimes is like, holy shit, who said that? Me? Just like activating force. You're doubling down on that stuff to such a degree that there's no way anyone could reciprocate that. So you have to be blown away. And then you forget that I'm not really fully here or available.
Yeah, I'm brought back to what we were saying earlier about feeling like you reach a certain place with a rejection type and you're like, all right, now we're gonna meet, like I don't need the offering, you don't need me to be the student or the receiver, whatever, like, and it's like, it goes right back into the thing, like with 5s, it's like, all right, now we're being friends. We don't need to do the head blast. We can just, it's like, oh, actually, here's a new way to head blast. Or, oh, I can really see you need help with this. And it's like, wow, I don't feel like there's a relationship has been established.
Yeah.
Like it's still this, but it's not even because it's so much head or so much heart or so much body, at least for me. It's just because I can feel that not negotiation, but that, putting their hands on the dynamic and trying to shift it. And you're like, all right, I only have so much like interest in fighting you making it go here. Because if you're making it go in this direction, it says to me that you're like not that interested in the actual thing. And so I think that's what can happen on the receiving end of with the rejection type. Because it's like, I mean, I experience this like, and by the way, like even though I'm as a frustration type, it's not like I feel like a full person, but what I can feel from rejection type, and I'll get this with my parents, is like, oh, a little glimmer, that the one directional thing is like lifted or something, or that there's some little error in the habitual thing, and you're like, oh, hello, mother, whatever, and then it's like, boom,
Yeah.
boom, right back to it, and
Leverage.
yeah, the thing shifts, and it's like, oh, the person I was trying to relate to isn't there anymore. It's just the offering or whatever we're using.
I mean, I think there is too, for those of us who are in relationship with rejection types. I mean, it is like a tsunami, of, and especially as an attachment type, it can feel like I know what to do. Actually, I know what this person wants, and it feels like I have to erase myself to play. And because I can feel the terms.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I was just talking about it from a frustration point of view. And yeah, that's interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, it's fucked up. It's like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this?
Well, I mean, like I've like a lot of two, like my mom's a two, and I've worked with twos where, I mean, you can really feel the agenda of, I don't understand why everyone just isn't like me. Like if you would just sort of give into this power of love and selflessness and reciprocate, all would be well. In fact, all needs would be taken care of, because I'll take care of your needs and you can take care of mine.
And then you try to reciprocate, and they're like, no. Just coming from me.
And I mean, you can, as an attachment type, you can really feel that. In a way that's very, especially if you have my mom is a two, it feels very tempting. And then there's, I'm sure there are plenty of times I gave into it. And then there are times where it's like that denial of personhood is so strong, I can't do it any longer. And then I reject, right, in the way that she's been trying to avoid this whole time.
Dark town. Yeah, it's just like it just feels like, this is not, I mean, none of these things are real stories, right? And to see how invested I am in this story and how reflexive it is, or how imprisoned I am to this story. Yeah, it's kind of like, it's extremely self-protective. You try to tell yourself, oh, I don't care. It's like, oh no, you do care. Like, you've set it up so that you never care. So it'd be interesting to sort of like unpack that and look at, what would it look like if I wasn't setting things up this way? And, I guess the experiences I've had the last few years, like even just like expressing how I feel to someone without setting anything up, without hedging my bets or anything like that, just a pure heart stream of like, and of course that is still kind of playing into the rejection thing because it's so over the top. And so I'm recognizing how like you can do it in such a way that you kind of make it so that the other person is unlikely to reciprocate it. So it's still there. But even trying to do that for me is a huge deal. Like these heart opening sort of expressions, that's completely out of bounds for the rejection game that I'm playing. Saying yes to love, but even still, I'm still seeing how all those what I thought were heart opening experiences were still shaped by a possession dynamic. So now I have to go back to the drawing board and see, what does it look like when you actually risk being hurt?
Well, I think one thing too is for the rejection type, people around the rejection type are seeing things about the rejection type that are not just the offering or whatever we're calling it. They're not just a thing. And they're seeing qualities of them. Like, there's ways to see a person.
Yeah.
And they might still be tied up in offering because we're all offering something to each other all the time. Like
Sure.
Our type is our offering and all that kind of shit. But this is so cheesy, but like in a sense that there's some of that stuff more available connection's not always on the narrow terms that all our personalities are trying to make them be on, you know? So like if somebody pays you a compliment, for example, like rejection types have a way of like that doesn't hit at all. Like, you know, like someone, for example, in a chat says something that touches you, and it's like, what do I do? You know,
Where do I put that?
Where do I put that? Well, you know, you don't really need to like put it anywhere. It's just like it's just there, and it's
Right.
there to just like kind of like it's kind of just a mysterious artifact in the ether rather than something that needs, you know,
To
like
do something with.
yeah, exactly.
I think for me, again, having thought a lot about this from an attachment perspective, I guess there's two things that come to me. You know, the first is sometimes it's easier to inhibit the automatic versus choosing to do something else.
Mm.
And so, you know, for me, I was thinking about, I mean, I get such a bodily sensation of flatness when I bump up against an area that a rejection type doesn't want to go into. I mean, it just, I feel in my body the blankness of the wall. I mean, it just, it feels very flat.
Mm.
And so I imagine that there is some bodily sensation of numbness or disassociation or flatness that's occurring before the rejection action takes place.
Yes.
And so that would be one thing I would suggest to rejection types is to become very curious and attuned to that bodily sensation and to catch it before acting. And I'll say for me, the attachment one was, I mean, it was a feeling of cloyingness. Like that was
what?
cloying, like this, like kind of like treacly, like the reaching, like clingy kind of like, I could feel that, like it felt like tentacles, like coming out of my body in a way that I hadn't like really experienced. And I'll feel that
That's interesting.
reaching for something outside to hold on to secure myself with. And that has become like the body signature for me of, okay, something's going on here that's probably not real.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I would say is that body thing. And then I think the second thing is, I think one for me, like the big lesson has been to not do something instead, but just to do less.
Yeah.
And actually sitting there, like the capacity to just sort of sit and wait and see what arises after the automatic habit has first come up and then it's been ignored or inhibited. Sort of trusting that in that brief moment, I'm there as a person and I just have to actually be. The idea of relating, and this is, we all get right? Like it's often just being there with someone and being with whatever they say and whatever happens to come out of your mouth.
Soaking in the juices, the being juices.
That's a really good thing you said about locating the sensation, because the feeling the rejection wall come up, I need to find language around what it feels like. But on the extreme end, it does feel like I'm out of my body. I'm not here. You're not talking to me. The person you're talking about has nothing to do with me. It just feels like we're not even on the same continent. It can feel like, what am I even doing here? I can't even remember why I gave a fuck about this. Like, it can feel like a sudden, like, I just got ripped away from that whole existence and I was in, this is like another life. And then I have to come back from that and like sort of like convince myself that, no, you shouldn't pack up everything and leave immediately, or, you know, just cut this off or whatever. So that sensation of defaulting back to being cut off feels very when it hits me, that's what it feels like. It feels like I was just completely ripped out from what I was experiencing, and I was watching myself in that experience. And then I have to decide to go back into being in that experience. And so it always feels like that's always an option, that I don't have to be here. I don't have to be touched by this.
How would you distinguish that from like a 9 going away?
When 9s dissociate, at least in my impression, the way I see or I feel the rejection wall versus the 9 not being there, it still feels like it's like they're dispersing. It's like a cloud that's dispersed, but it's still there. It's very much there, but it's like you can't really grab onto anything. Whereas the way rejection types feel to me, even as a rejection type, is that it feels like an absence. Like it feels like now you're talking into a cave. Like there's nothing. Like literally, it does feel like there's nothing.
Yep. Yep.
And I've felt myself, being in situations where it feels like there are different degrees of my being here that others can feel. Like I can be in a full-on conversation and it doesn't feel like anything the person's saying matters, and that seems to change depending on the person. And so, like even with 5s, I do feel that more overtly with 5s, where it doesn't feel like they're there. Not the way that 9s are dispersing. It's like there's a detachment on an essential level. Like that's hard to explain, but it really doesn't feel like you're making any contact. Whereas 9s, it's like you're making contact. It's just not anything solid that you can grab onto. When you try to grab onto something, it just dissipates. But there's someone there.
9 is like a field of being that isn't. It's a paradox, thing where it's like
space.
It's the whole field of being, but the whole field of nothing at the same time, or something.
When I'm go ahead.
Like rejection feels more like a hole has appeared now. Like there's a there's a gap here now, and
I guess I feel the boundary in the wall in the rejection types,
right?
That I don't feel the boundary in the 9 with the disassociation. Like it's so that it's both of those things.
Yeah, it's like being in some kind of gel, and when you like grab, like you reach your arm out to grab the gel, and then like the thing you're supposed to grab just slips out, goes behind you.
Yeah,
and you're like this, and that's like 9.
Yeah.
Whereas with rejection, I'll be on the side of a certain wall, and then I'll like recognize like, oh, this is what this is right now. I just have to wait till this is over. I have to get out of this. Like,
you know what it is? Oh, go ahead.
You good?
It's like a wall that only has like a couple holes of access, and so the rejection type is going to speak to you when they're available through this hole. And this one, like there's a wall and there's this hole, and you can only talk to the rejection type when their head pokes out of that hole. But then you want to talk to them. Maybe you move to another side of the wall, and it's like you're just getting wall because they're not accessible at that. Like let's say like a full person is just there's no wall there. You can talk to, you can move around, you can talk, but the rejection type is only accessible through certain parts of the wall.
It's like, I know nobody can see me that's listening, but it's kind of like this. They're screaming at you through this little thing. You just get this aggressive mouth coming, and you're just like, God, okay.
It's blowtorch.
I'm super glad we got the video just so we could do that. But it does capture that possessive, that tsunami, that pouring, the spilling, the taking, the pounding, like all of that's like language of like, it's got like such a small channel to go through to feel the person that it's super, super intense.
Yeah,
and there is this,
because the aperture is small, then the force coming out is greater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really do feel this,
Pressurized.
like, just let me sweep you away with this. Like,
Mhm,
just buy this
mhm.
story, you know,
Yep.
like,
We're,
Yeah.
Alexander and I are in this chat and with a bunch of people, and there's an 8 in there, and then Alexander jokes that it's waking the baby up because he just starts shit and just
Oh, yeah.
doesn't stop until it's like waiting for the baby to go to sleep because he's just like just going. Everything is
Yeah.
just fuel for the fucking with people stuff, and then
Yeah.
it's like, you know, but at the same time, even though this person is saying stuff that's extremely provocative and offensive and like,
Yeah.
you know,
over
stuff
the
that
top.
no one else could get away with, because it's just this wall. Everybody just kind of like, all right,
he's
whatever.
doing that thing again.
Yeah, like, I mean, he'll just say like the like some nasty personal stuff, but it doesn't kind of get under your skin, you know.
Yeah.
It's just a cartoon, you know.
It is.
It's like, all right, like he just got to tire himself out.
Oh man, yeah, you can see how one note, because it's like my entire personhood is on this thing, so you can become very one track, one note personality over time, because you know you've just doubled down on a few specific things, so that's why it feels so inflexible, or other people might experience rejection types as inflexible because they're super invested. And what makes these offerings so potent is that the rejection type has really doubled down and specialized. And so you come back 5 years later and it's still like, yeah, I still only care about these couple things, and they've probably narrowed down even more than the last time.
Yeah.
Because in order for it to be potent, to become more potent, I have to specialize. I have to continue to specialize, because the next time you come back, I've got to have something even more specific and more potent than the last time, which means I got to go even deeper than I was before.
yeah, I mean, for me, this wall, the blankness of the and then I can feel the slippery quality of the attachment types, like kind of it's like feels very watery, the eel like, and then the frustration, it's like the vroom vroom, you know, like that.
Revving the engine.
Yeah.
Pain. There's not enough pain here.
But I do think that they're like I think those body cues are really important
Mm-hmm.
in terms of, I would think, typing.
Oh yeah,
But
they are
also-
very.
Well,
Not
For
that I
some
would
people.
know,
Yeah,
but
you wouldn't know anything about that.
go ahead.
what I was gonna add to what you were saying earlier about the body stuff is I think that like rejection types that want to work with this stuff need to like first spend some time getting familiar with the absence, like, because I think that some rejection types could be like, I don't do that, or you know, I'm not blank, or whatever, you know, all this kind of shit or
Yeah.
whatever, because it's painful to see it and to admit, and it does challenge the habitual organization of the self. But let's like spend some time like really absorbing and like feeling like, oh, this is where the absence is, this is where the blank, and just like getting familiar with it. And then when you can hold it for long enough, then I think like inviting, you know, what you said, Courtney, trust of, okay, like it feels absent, but I can like have like a leap of faith that maybe it's not totally absent for other people. And I can even fucking check in with other people and get their invite, you know, open that little aperture just a little bit more, be like, what do you think?
Yeah.
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 Well, because I do think the hopefulness is, this is your self-concept, but this is not who you are.
Yeah.
And if I walked around and recorded you all day long, which you would love, I know, we would feel your heart.
Yeah.
We would see your heart.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Emeka's is quite easy to pick up, despite his no, I got a day. Cancer rising, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always weird when people observe things about me that, you know, I'm a fully formed human being, and my sort of reaction to that is kind of like, it feels weird because, oh yeah, that's really cool to, I guess, to see, oh, people are seeing me as a full person, to sort of step out of like, oh, it's what you're bringing, that cynical sense that it's what you're bringing, when people can actually see my full humanity. And I wonder just like how much social blind makes that even worse. I'd be interested to, well, at least, you know, from what I could tell from Jesse's interviews, even as a social type, there's that sense of like wanting connection, but only seeing connection through this little hole, this little limited hole that we might be able to approximate connection. So it does seem like it's really not just a social blind thing. It's more specifically a rejection thing.
I think there's something also, and I think you spoke about it at different points. You know, I was sort of talking about that zone in which rejection gets activated before there's been pain.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's this sort of vigilance around we're getting dangerously close to the territory where I've been hurt in the past that I don't want to admit. And so let me get out ahead of it. And then when something does land that is hurtful, there's this just immediate, like, kind of never again.
Yeah.
Like, and so I do think I can imagine that for rejection types, and I think you have spoken about this, there is a re-engagement with things that happened long ago. That is part of the process.
Yeah.
Because the strategy, as the aperture gets opened, it's gonna make it hard, right? That's gonna get reignited.
Yeah. Old stuff is gonna come up. That's probably why
that won't make any sense. That won't make any sense.
That's why that breathwork session, like, in order for me to have a fuller contact with myself, then the things that I cut off from a long time ago, half that maybe I didn't process. This is something I learned after I had my first bad breakup, because generally most things are easy to cut off from. But that one was so painful that I couldn't do that. And it took like over a year to get over. And so it kind of taught me, like, you kind of aggressively have to deal with the pain instead of cutting off from it, because you're going to have to deal with it at some point. And so I've gotten better at just being hurt, just allowing myself to be hurt. Like, I actually have to allow myself to be hurt, because just cutting off from it just means that I'm delaying or spreading out the being hurt. And sort of comes up in some kind of fucked up way. And so, yeah, that's been a big one.
I forgot also, it's reminding me that part of that tsunami analogy that I was using, it's almost sort of like, how do I connect with you as a full person without having to risk pain?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want to have to go, let me just bowl you over and have the connection be so big in this area that I don't have to risk opening this other side of myself and still experience fullness, still experience a feeling of complete connection without having to go to the spot
where I could be hurt.
Yes. And so I'm trying to get it without the risk.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so insistent on, let me seduce you, let me
over abstract,
bowl you over with how powerful this is, so that we can all just forget that part.
Yeah. It's like the 8 thing of being over provocative and getting the validation of seeing people react to that. It sort of gives you validation that I'm a person. If I can just set everybody on fire, then cool. You know, I don't have to touch the opposite part. So I'm just going to go hard in starting as many fires as I can. I mean, it's funny that, you know, people, with all the controversies surrounding us and people being upset and mad about the group, I don't think people actually realize how much that's really food for my soul. Like, it's literally validating that it's like, there's so many people out there that I've never spoken to that are literally like mad as fuck for this or that reason. So it's playing into the sort of 8 thing of just the more people get mad at Trump or whoever, it's like, that's really validating to an 8, because it's like, oh, my personhood is activating something out there. None of this is touching me because I'm just the activator of some controversy or whatever, or, you know, contributing to controversy. So it's very validating to the 8 structure.
Something, we were talking about reclaiming the pieces that have been cut off. Another thing about that, especially, I'm saying this, you know, given Emeka your interest in like relationships and stuff like this, is like it's like you cut a part off and then you go into the next relationship even less of a person.
Yes.
And so you're gonna like be attracted to people who are not gonna who are gonna be into you, maybe in a big way, but into you as less of a person. You know? And it's like you're more of that honed in function. So it's like, oh man, I love the function, and then you try to expand outside of the function, and then it's like, hey, what the fuck is this?
Right.
And so part of for rejection types is they've trained people, or they've presented themselves to others in such a way where it's I'm just the function. And so to be able to ensure that future relationships and things like that don't just take me to be a cartoon, I have to reclaim those pieces, because it's like that. If I reclaim those pieces that can be hurt.
Yes.
It's like then I'll be with somebody that can actually hurt me. In the meaning, somebody that I can actually like really be touched by and care about. And Alexander's been reading this book about like pain and suffering called Bittersweet or something. And what was it, baby? Something about who you love is who you suffer for, or something.
Yeah.
Anything? Or the star of the show.
I mean, it's essentially that. It's the whole premise is that suffering comes from longing, and longing comes from love. So if you are suffering for somebody, it is inherently because you love them. And so if you're not willing to suffer for them, there's a lack of like inherent care there. You know, or at least that's like the soul's like thing.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Rejection types trying to get into a relationship where they can't be hurt, meaning they can't be in a relationship.
Yeah. And
in a full way, at least.
And to your point, Courtney, that everyone has this sort of function in them, but it's more true for rejection types, you know, sort of like, you know, some of these like right-wing dudes who say, oh, I prefer someone who's not been in too many relationships, or someone who, because it's like the more relationships you've had, the more heartbreaks you've had, the more shut down a heart is. And so the less likely a person is, or less capacity someone has to actually deeply connect with someone. And that's really true for rejection types, because it's like, never again. If you hurt me one way, my personality structure is set up in a way that to make sure it doesn't happen again, which means a couple years goes by, I'm more protected than I was the last time you met me. And even just like running this group, that's very true. Like when we first started the group, we were very naively engaging with everyone. And of course, horrible things happened, drama, and we were forced to disengage and not spend as much time engaging with people day to day. There had to be some level of distance because people are going to have their reactions. And every year that goes by, there's even more and more of a distance. And now it's more that we create the content that people engage with, but we're not necessarily spending as much back and forth time, or not at all, pretty much not at all. So you can see how over time, to prevent these crazy things from happening, you have to maintain a wall. And so for rejection, it's very much the dynamic of the personality structure is to, over time, just shut down any possibility of any sort of hurt repeating itself, which I guess the thing that's been really cool the last 5 years is that I've really tried to go in the opposite direction. It's like I've been like, you know, I want to be in love, and that's a very risky thing. And to put your heart on the line is a fucking risky thing, but it's actually really exhilarating. I mean, nothing else feels more alive than that, to like put it on the line. But it's really fucking scary. What's more scary than that? Not to say that I've achieved anything, but it's trying to go in that direction has been pretty cool.
I'll say, as a wet blanket heart type, despite being with a steel wall rejection type and a very dissipating 9 over here, you two fellas are the two fellas that I can be most in my heart with. So, fuck y'all.
I don't know where to put that, John. I don't know where to put that.
Yeah, that just went into the cloud of my being. And I'm not sure where it is now.
I don't know what to do with what you just said, John.
No, like you said before, John, there's definitely that heart activation thing that happens around you for sure.
Yeah,
So
big
I
time.
feel that big time. Yeah.
I mean, you know that you're the inspiration for me being like, oh wow, this is actually a thing I can do.
Mhm.
I can actually, be in my heart. So like you're a living example of something that I know is possible, even though I know you're a heart type. It's like I can at least move 10%. I can do 10%, John.
There you go.
Well, I love you, guys.
Love you.
Love
And you
too.
too, Courtney and Alexandra.
Love you, Courtney.
Love you, Courtney, even though you can't type.
We love you, Courtney, but you can't type.
Yeah, there was the little rejection piece. My heart's not that open.
It's not that open. It's not complete unless you spice it up with a little rejection. She said, don't stop, just do less. So that's what I'm doing.
Hilarious.
People actually need to hear it to talk about this stuff because in most people's minds, they have to set up as this like interpersonal relationship expert.
Yeah.
And in some ways, the way they come across is to give you the impression that they are. That's what they're trying to convince you that they're doing, which is part of what makes people so upset about twos is once you realize what they're actually doing versus what they appear to be doing.
Well, that's also part of the reason why they're never going to admit it, right? I mean, like already, like it pierces the self-concept.
Mm-hmm.
It punctures it.
Right.
In a way that will be really hard. I mean, it's this catch-22. It's going to be really hard.
And that's the really important core thing that he revealed in that interview. He's like, this is what I had to see. Like, and most twos, if not all twos, aren't going to be able to see this because the personality is invested in making sure that I'm just a source of all love and selfless love. It's not see this ulterior motive. I'm like, that's the problem. That's why you can't really interview twos because they're going to give you this bullshit of how much they're just a source of love and everything. Like, can I actually have a real conversation with the two?
I know we're winding down. It was super helpful for me to listen to that, like us, like thinking about how you coach a two, because for me, it's like cognitively, once you see the hypocrisy, for me, that's very motivating. Like,
yeah.
Fuck. Like, I say this, yet I'm doing this. Like, that internal inconsistency drives me bananas.
Yep.
And so my starting point is like, if I just tell you what you're up to, that'll start it going. And that's just not true.
Yeah. So no, it'd be really helpful if he could come on here and articulate that, because we don't get very many twos, and so that means rejection types don't really, and eights don't really come forward and talk about themselves, and fives, so you don't really get a chance to really find out what rejection types are up to. There are not that many of them, and they're not really putting themselves out there to be touched.
No, it's back to the whole vulnerability thing.
So
I thought you've been really open, Emeka.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really open.
For sure.
I'm serious. It's been like a big gift.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
I received that compliment.
You did. You did. Now sit with that for a moment.
Sit with that, yeah.
Be with it.
Okay. Talk to you later.
All
All right, guys.
Thanks,
Okay,
Courtney.
bye. Yeah,
Bye.
thank you guys. Bye. Bye.
Bye.